Hi, I'm Jack Brinn, and I'm a longtime fan of classical music. It's been very meaningful in my life. Today's topic is going to be about the decline of an audience for classical music, and it'll be in three parts. First of all, we'll be talking about what each of us feels they've observed that confirms the fact that there's a loss of an audience for classics. Then after that, we'll talk about what are the possible causes, and finally, are there any solutions to this problem? Okay, and what we'll do is go from Marshall down to me, and maybe you'll introduce yourself as you start talking about the first part of this program, and that's what have you seen or heard that tells you that classical music is on the way out for audiences?
Hi, I'm Marshall Rolnick, and a longtime lover of classical music. The decline of interest, I feel, is not unique to classical music. Locally, the same can be said for Hartford Stage, TheaterWorks, and many other arts organizations. In large cities such as New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, the audiences are much less gray, but those situations are far from the norm today. The things that I've observed that confirm it over the years is the aging of the audiences at places that I attend frequently, such as Hartford Symphony Orchestra and Music Mountain. Secondly, many orchestras have gone out of existence or come close to doing so in the past few years. Even the great Philadelphia Orchestra almost had to shut down several years ago. Thirdly, lack of emphasis in the schools, probably due to budgetary constraints. The fourth thing that I've observed is the change in musical interests of the times in general, from big bands, swing, rock and roll, doo-wop, disco, to acid rock, rap, etc. And fifth, no generational continuity, situations where parents love it and listen to it, but the children don't even give it a chance. And lastly, there are fewer FM radio stations playing classical music.
Walter?
Hello, I'm Walter Simmons, and I'm a musicologist and critic visiting from the New York City suburban area. And I would have to say that much of what I've observed confirms what Marshall has just said. We live very close to a college with a large performing arts center where all the big names who perform in New York City perform there as well. And I'm always struck by the preponderance of elderly people. Not even the students at the very college come to these events. So I think that this is very disturbing, and I think that there are a number of reasons for it, and one of the reasons is that general music classes, as Marshall said, are being eliminated from public school curriculums. And although classical music has this association with music for old people, and that's what a lot of young people think, oh, well, that's for old people. And looking at us, that may confirm that. However, I can say that I have been a lover of classical music since the age of 3, and I do believe that early exposure is the best way to engender an interest. Many people first hear classical music when they're in their late teens or early 20s, and it doesn't sink in as deeply as when it's presented to children, as it is, for example, through the Suzuki violin method. So, one counterexample is that when we go to concerts in New York City, in the Lincoln Center area, there are many more young people but that is partly because you have the Juilliard School right there. So those are a few of my thoughts of what I've observed.
My name's Russ Salk, a lifelong music lover and classical music lover. Certainly, the points that they've raised are pretty much covers it. A couple of points that I would like to add to that. I know many years ago I talked to somebody who was a music teacher of the school, and he made the comment that the phys ed department got more money budgeted for it for towels than the entire budget for the music department. And things have only gotten worse in most schools. So that's one problem. Another thing I would point to that they haven't brought up is the decline in sales of recorded music, CDs. Records are coming back, but again, and whatever the MP3, whatever, the sales of classical music is declining. For many, many years, it was at a steady 3%, something like that. The numbers were small, but very steady. Well, that percentage has declined. So these are the things that I'm aware of. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay, well, my name is still Jack Bryn, and the commentary on schools is interesting, and we might do more about that in a while. I'll take a slightly different tack. Radio was my connection with classical music. It's been mentioned that the number of classical stations is reduced. In fact, there's only one in Connecticut, and it's not full-time classical because on the weekend evenings they play other. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is in the old days before TV and in the early days of TV, radio still held some sway, and there were some programs where classical music was involved in the program, the background music. Lone Ranger, of course, is the biggest. That had over a dozen different classical themes. Green Hornet had 3, and there were several others that didn't have more than one, but I think I wrote them down. Green Hornet had Flight of the Bumblebee and the Accursed Hunter and the Il Guarni Overture. Sergeant Preston of the Yukon used the Donna Diana Overture. The Shadow used Umfal's Spinning Wheel by Saint-Saëns. I Love a Mystery used Valse Triste by Sibelius. These are all kid shows. So kids were getting exposed to classical music without even knowing it. And I found there was a wonderful music I didn't know was classical, but as I grew, it turned out, gee, these things were familiar when I listened to classical music stations. I don't know, let's see, Les Prelude by Liszt, that was one of the Lone Ranger pieces, and I've heard that before. And my interest in music grew thanks largely to these theme songs from different programs. And that's my addition to the radio learning process. A commentary?
I'd just like to make a comment about what you said. I think there is a parallel phenomenon going on today, and this is one of the positive signs that I detect, and that is that the main way that young people today encounter the sound of the symphony orchestra is through video game background music. And some of that music is not bad. It may not be using familiar themes from the classics, but it is using a symphonic sound and introducing that to kids. And in fact, my own son, when he was a teenager, he was playing a video game that used the famous Beethoven piano sonatas, the Appassionata and Pathétique and Waldstein, as background music. And one day I happened to overhear him while he was playing this game, and I asked him, do you know what that music is? And he said no, and I told him that was Beethoven, and I identified the pieces. A couple of days later, he said, can I get a CD with those pieces? So I, of course, immediately ran out to buy him one. And he had already been taking piano lessons. He decided he was going to learn the Appassionata Sonata, which was about 12 levels too difficult for him. But he said, "Do you think I could do it?" I said, "Well, if you practice enough." I mean, what was I going to say? No. So he did. He started practicing it. Well, he never mastered it, but he mastered the Moonlight Sonata and he mastered the Pathétique.
Wow.
And this was all the result of exposure through video games. So I think that is one of the bright spots.
Okay, I'd like to mention something about following up the symphonic music. That happens in movies, and so that's a good introduction. And in fact, a lot of movie music has become classics, largely pop classics, some not so. But the introduction of the symphony orchestra is wonderful in that. Movies, yes. There was a commentary about school and instrumental performance as people teach an instrument in the schools. This does nothing for listening. Now, if a person who's playing an instrument, even in an orchestra, still has to concentrate on the instrument, can't listen to the entire thing. And I think that's unfortunate, and it would be wonderful if some schools, all schools, would pay attention to listening as a legitimate course. Call it music appreciation or call it something else. But listening, maybe assign some programs to listen to or assign some pieces of music to listen to. And if you don't have anything handy, there's always YouTube. It'll be on there. So I think
totally agree with that. I think that is really a great way to move forward.
Yeah, thank you. Walter is a pro, so I take that as high praise.
Jack, can I add on to
please,
your
yeah.
list of
The
things?
programs that had...
when I was very, very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, one of my aunts gave me a recording, and it was either a child's treasury of verses or a child's treasury of music, something like that. And it had various songs, and it had kids' words to the songs, to the classical songs. And for instance, the Barcarolle. It had "When I Float My Little Toy Boat," and it went on like that. And so you got to know you were singing the kids' words, but then when you heard the music later, you recognize, just like you said.
Yeah.
And then also one of my favorite programs when I was a little older, when I was a teenager, late teenager, or mid-teenager, was a program called The Big Story. It was about a reporter. Every week they did a different reporter who had done a big story about some relevant issue. And the music to that every week was the Don Juan by Strauss.
Mm-hmm.
So there were lots of programs in those days, and it just doesn't happen today. I mean, today it's
Who
reality
knows
shows.
about morning is dawning and Peer Gynt is yawning.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing that has to be mentioned is the movie Fantasia,
Oh, yes,
which
yes.
a whole generation introduced a whole generation of people to classical music, and that was for people that don't know, it was a Walt Disney cartoon production, and the whole thing was different classical pieces. The most famous being Mickey Mouse as the Sorcerer's Apprentice. But this was a major movie on the screen. I think it was shot maybe 1939, perhaps.
Yes.
And it was a tremendous movie at the time. It included Beethoven, Bach, Stravinsky, Tchaikovsky, and Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain.
Schubert.
And it was introduced, Schubert, yes, Ave Maria, and it introduced an entire generation of people to classical music.
And it was presumably for kids. There's very little that goes on that kind of introduces kids or tries to drag them away from the internet. Okay. Anything else about this, or shall we go on to the next part?
Could go on.
Yeah, we can come back to this anyway. All right, the next part is what do you think what are the several causes for this decline in interest in classical music? I think some things have been mentioned, like there's fewer radio stations and there's just less available, but what else?
My answer to that question is really all of my answers to the first question, except for maybe the second one about the orchestras going out of existence, or coming close to doing so. I mean, that's had a little effect, but basically, again, the aging of the audiences, the lack of emphasis in the schools, the change of musical interests, no generational continuity, and fewer FM stations. Those are the ones that come to mind. They're really the same issues. What have I seen, and to what do I attribute it, are really the same things that I can think of.
Okay.
I went on the internet. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I went on the internet to
You're next.
research that question and to see what was out there. And the number of answers out there was almost staggering. Some of it contradictory. But let me just give you a couple of examples. Our culture increasingly resembles, for lack of a better term, a cartoon. Cartoon aesthetics is behind much of pop and hip-hop. The cartoon Simpsons replaced sitcoms with humans, and WWE wrestling, a cartoonish sport if ever there was one, is more popular than ever. Our athletes dance like cartoon characters when they score touchdowns, and then they mention Kim Kardashian.
Mention the applause that the politicians get, after some stupid comment. Excuse me.
Yes.
Back to you, Russ. It's like a cartoon.
They mentioned the price of tickets that people have to pay. I really think ticket prices are a problem. If I wish to attend the symphony with my wife, I must pay nearly $300 to $400 for 2 seats. That would be the Los Angeles Philharmonic. I personally would rather pay $20 to see a college orchestra than give up a paycheck on a couple of shows from a larger, more
That's fine. Let
professional-
them go to the college
Nothing wrong with that,
orchestras
right?
then.
Yeah. The standard classical music performance is fast becoming a boring anachronism for most people in our up-close and personal age. I believe audiences don't dislike art music, they just can't relate to it for several reasons.
These are several different people commenting.
These are several different people, and one person refers to the problem as laid out by Leonard Bernstein on his TV series that the concert hall was simply going to become a museum for old music. Many, many answers. It goes on from there.
Yes, but I think that is a real danger. To the extent that the concert hall becomes a museum for old music, that it leads it into a boring direction, and that's a big mistake. I personally feel that there should be a much greater emphasis on music of our own time, and that will keep it from being boring. Now, some people say, but music from contemporary music is ugly and nobody likes it. Well, I think that is just the result of bad selection. I think that it's the conductor's responsibility to discover new music that will capture the interest of audiences. That's the job, not just waving your arms. The job is finding the right repertoire. And there are very few conductors who actually are familiar, and I include in this the big name conductors, usually are only familiar with a handful of living or recent composers, and they really don't take that part of their responsibility seriously.
And the fact of contemporary music, some of it being worthwhile, is one of Russ's themes, because he has a program at the Bloomfield Library, and it's about 21st century classical music, which is something that until I went there I thought, there's nothing worth hearing today of anything new coming out. and it turns out not to be so. Um, what I'd like to do is, I beg your pardon, but I'm going to read what I wrote. The causes. The plethora of musical genres. It's just too much of different kinds of music. Overwhelming effect of the internet. Try to drag somebody away from a phone. The trivia on TV, and it really is trivia. These are terrible distractions. Well, these are distractions. I'll leave the terrible out and let you fill in a word. But classical music requires some effort. No other music requires effort. It comes out and grabs you. Rock certainly did that because it was consistently loud. Jazz moves very well, and it's very lively as a rule. Classical music, well, one of the problems I have is listening to classical music on the radio in the car, because it goes from very loud to very soft, and it gets lost. So in the car, it's not where you really listen, you just pass time with it. But if you're listening seriously, you have to pay attention to the quiet and the loud, and the fact that a piece of music can go on for an hour sometimes. Half an hour is a reasonable symphony. But it takes time and effort to get used to classical music, and this repetition of the music is essential. How many people are willing to put in the time now? Not many, I think, and that somehow should be reversed. I don't know how. Another thing is that the pursuit of money has cost a lot. Initially, when TV came out, it was education-minded, and over the years, it went from arts and education to arts to entertainment. I think Edward R. Murrow commented on that when his broadcast was threatened because it just wasn't entertaining enough. Well, he held out, and the CBS, I think it was, stayed with him. But since that time, entertainment is the big thing. It's the money maker. Yeah, money. God, it is really the root of all evil, at least when it comes to the arts. It has damaged all the arts and TV. I should be on a soapbox. Classical music itself took a wrong turn in the 20th century. Centuries of comfortable major-minor scales were abandoned, leaving audiences bewildered by atonality. I think you mentioned that atonality is on the way. It was all in the school systems, the colleges, and they're backing off it now.
Yes, there is a certain, we live in a much, within composition departments, there's a much more laissez-faire attitude where all styles are acceptable. Whereas when I was going to music school, there were very strong prohibitions against anything that sounded in any way connected to the music of the past. That was a terrible wrong turn, and it alienated many music lovers, and it was extremely destructive. But I think we're starting to come back to that, to come back to now to a greater acceptance. There's a composer of today named Michael Torkey, who has confronted this question right out and says, I know that people don't have the time to listen to a new piece repeatedly. So in my music, I am trying to create something that can be appreciated the first time it is heard. And he, as a result, has become one of the most popular of the 21st century composers.
Okay, I'll go back to this, but the wrong turn. In the early 20th century, there were some really weird ideas. There's something called chance music, and I saw an example of this on a TV program about culture in the Western world. It was a man with a clarinet, and he was looking at a fish tank. The fish tank had the bars of a music score, and there were no notes. The fish were the notes. And he would go higher on the scale as the fish went higher, faster if the fish was faster. He just followed a fish. That was certainly chance. Music, I'm not so sure. Another example, let's see, electronic sounds. The tape recorder would be, maybe breaking glass was on it. And speaking of glass, Glass is a composer I'm not crazy about. But anyway, there would be something on a tape, and they would make loops of the tape, and you would have just some kind of background, and that might be the whole piece of music, just noises, not music. There was an idea of the prepared piano, which would be tying things to the strings of a piano, like nuts and bolts or paper, and then play the piano. And it didn't sound like a piano. It didn't sound like music. But people were experimenting. Try something new. Maybe it'll sell. Well, I don't think it did, and I certainly hope it didn't. Not for long, anyway. Oh, the other one was playing under the lid. A guy named Henry Cowell invented this idea of lifting up the lid of a piano and then just play on the strings. Made some interesting stuff, actually. Something called a banshee was very good. A good description of a banshee. And that can be found. You can see it performed on YouTube. And YouTube is very interesting because you can see some of these things. But this idea was rejected whenever he went around the world doing performances of this kind of stuff, lifting up the lid and fiddling around. It was just not what people were used to, and it was just too much of a major change, and it didn't go over well. But he was at least a genuine composer. He did something like 13, 14 symphonies, or maybe even more. But he was a wonderful composer, and later on in life he seemed to settle down into very enjoyable music. Enjoyable for me, anyway. And short, so it didn't take much time to enjoy these things. Hymns and fuguing tunes, a lot of them were called. And so if you go to Henry Cowell, and in addition to the stuff under the lid of a piano, listen to some of the hymns and fuguing tunes.
Going back to the atonality of some of the music, even Charles Ives, Walter, you may know this better than me, or better than I should say. One of Charles Ives' symphonies is not really that much atonal, except for the last two notes of the symphony, and I don't know which one it is.
I think it might be the second you're referring to.
Yeah, it's a beautiful symphony, and then it goes along, and the last two notes are, you think something went wrong. You think they were playing it wrong, but it's not. It's intended.
Yeah. At that time, or in that symphony, he had a lot of songs, American songs, folk songs, and it was like a pastiche. I remember my first time I heard that actually in concert, and I went with somebody else, and the two of us were laughing like heck because it seemed so silly, but it's a symphony that has caught on and is worth listening to. But it takes a while.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned, Jack, was the fact that I've been doing a music program at one of the local libraries here in Bloomfield.
The Prosser.
The Prosser
Come see
Library
us.
in Bloomfield. And it's actually the first Tuesday of the month. I've been doing this now for a long time. And I'm introducing music by living composers. And you can hear that the days of this atonality are basically over for most of the composers. One of the points that I try to make at the beginning of every program is that there's more people writing music today than ever before, and they are writing in more genres than ever before. I found a magazine article that basically said that in the middle of the 20th century, essentially music history, which had been a straight line up to that point, exploded, and everything and anything became possible. And when you listen to new music today, some people are going back to almost like medieval chant. Some people are in fact doing atonal stuff. Other people are incorporating some atonality in different spots, but it's a very, very light. And much of the music people have really, really enjoyed. I just want to read something here, something I took off the internet. My husband is an elementary school music teacher, as well as the director of a couple of local choirs and a composer. Yesterday, for his third graders, he played two very different pieces of music, a song by the Gypsy Kings and a movement from a mass by Arvo Part. Now, Arvo Part is one of today's more popular and well-known composers. According to my husband, the kids enjoyed the part a lot and were able to come up with some interesting similarities between this rock band and the classical music piece that they heard by Arvo Part.
That's very interesting. I think coming back to something we were saying earlier, the importance of early exposure. When you get kids before they've learned what kinds of music are cool and what kinds of music are not cool, they are much more receptive and open-minded and respond much more spontaneously to what they hear. Now, we mentioned that that for monetary reasons, general music classes have been eliminated from the curriculum, but I know that there are some institutions and organizations, for example, the Community Music School in Springfield, Massachusetts, actually sends music teachers into the local public schools to provide general music classes. And I think that if the school boards can support music education, then taking advantage of resources like local music schools is another way for them to get music to young people.
Okay, is this a music appreciation sort of thing as opposed to performance?
I think that it's sort of introducing kids to music. I mean, if you're going to have a general music class, it's going to be listening oriented.
That's nice to hear about. Lucky Springfield. Okay, yeah.
Another resource that people don't give enough consideration to are the community orchestras. We have several around here: the West Hartford Symphony, the Farmington Valley Symphony, and the Manchester Symphony Orchestra. These are a lot less expensive to go to than the major symphonies. They do a good job, and they're introducing classical music. They're getting it out there to the local community. And actually, I've seen more families go there, and the kids do go to those.
That's great. That's great.
Are we ready to go on to part three? What can we do about it? Or what can be done? I don't know if we can do it, but what can be done to reverse this terrible trend and bring a newer audience back to classical music? Because I only see people over 50, and in 10 years we'll be over 60, another 10 will be gone. So there won't be an audience at all unless young people are invited somehow. All right. Okay, the solution. Go ahead.
Before I get to my answer, I just want to make a comment that in Hartford, in the Hartford area, we're blessed with two amazing organizations. One is the Hart School of Music, which has I get a brochure every 3 months listing the musical events over the next 3 months, and there's more than something. There are many things every single day of the week, and I would say at least half of them are free. Some of the actual concerts are free. The ones that are not free are very inexpensive. You can go to a full orchestral concert conducted by Edward Cumming, who was the former conductor of the Hartford Symphony. You can go to a solo recital by any instrument that you may like, and quartets, all kinds of things that are at the University of Hartford and at the Hart School, and it goes on daily. The other major asset that we have in music in Hartford is Carolyn Kwan, who's the conductor of the Hartford Symphony, who is just amazing. She's young, vibrant, and has brought younger people to the symphony since she's been here. Our program just came out. I just got it yesterday for this coming season, and it's the most exciting thing I've ever seen from the Hartford Symphony. All kinds of different music. There's a guitar and violin concerto. There's I can't even remember them all, but several new modern composers who I've never heard of. I'm sure I will enjoy them. And she is largely responsible for the programming that is going on this year and has gone on for the past few years. They had a beatboxer a couple of years ago. Never heard of a beatboxer, but it was tremendous. It was,
Really?
somebody holding a microphone up and just making sounds to while the orchestra was playing. But it was amazing what came out.
Did it go with different notes, or was it just a
Yeah.
steady?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can see that on YouTube too. Anyway, getting back to how to build an audience for the future. First of all, I think there are so many excellent young musicians coming out of music schools and conservatories. They have families and friends, and they might become part of the audience of the future if there are enough of them, enough of the family and friends that will follow the students. Another thing is I have two apps on my cell phone. One is for the violinchannel.com and the other is Medici.com. Medici.com is a paid service. I don't pay for it, but some of the things that they do you can see live if you catch it at the right time, and they do send notifications of the programming sometimes so that you can catch some of the things. And they also have some things that they do release that you do not have to pay for. The Violin Channel is free. There's so much information about these brilliant young musicians on these two channels, along with videos, some of them taken during the many competitions that take place around the world. If the millennials, and I guess they don't like that term anymore, but if they ever catch on to this information and the music on the internet, that might also be a way to build a new audience. And then my third point would be that classical music programs in the elementary, junior high, and high schools led by teachers, local orchestras members, and local orchestra members, and local college music school professors and students might be a way to get younger people involved or exposed to classical music. And my fourth point, I don't know whether that could work because it involves organizations maybe giving up some income. But if they could take elementary, junior high, and high school students to symphony concerts and other classical music programs, for instance, perhaps blocks of unsold tickets for certain concerts could be given by symphonies to these schools for that purpose.
Good idea.
And I think Hartford Symphony has tried that. I know that the Hartford Symphony has 4 concerts for each of their concerts. They have 4 because it's in a smaller theater than it used to be. It's in the building at the Bushnell, and it holds 900 people, whereas the old hall held 2,800 people. They used to do 2 concerts, now they do 4, and they do Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon at 3. And I've only been to one Sunday afternoon concert, and I noticed that there were a lot more families there. And I've been told by some of the people from the symphony that that is true, that the Sunday concert does attract a very, very high number of young people.
I'd like to interrupt for just a minute. For the listeners out
You're not
there.
interrupting, I'm through.
Oh, all right. For the listeners out there, if you have any questions you would like to ask, I would imagine that Win TV, if you write to them with the questions, they'll forward them to us, and we can maybe answer them directly to you, not on TV. Okay, you're finished with?
Yes.
All right. I think having people aware of what's available is extremely important, and awareness is what's on the phone right now. I'm bitter. Can you tell, Walter?
Well, I think that what Marshall said was all fine ideas, and I would just add to that the answer is in reaching out every opportunity, without pandering. Reaching out does not have to include dumbing down or pandering, but it does involve some understanding of what the audience you're trying to bring in responds to, what kinds of things might capture their interest. As I've often said, about this issue of classical music being old people's music. The fact is, most of the standard repertoire was composed by people under the age of 40. It is really young people's music. And all the feelings and experiences that young people encounter are captured in this music. The challenge is to bridge the gap to enable young people to realize that they can find their own identities in this music. It isn't all from a distant time and a distant place. And I think that reaching out into the schools is an answer. All the things that were said, bringing kids to the local orchestras, all those things are the way to do it.
Okay, I've got to say, I think there's a multitude of approaches and no one answer. There are so many ways to try to reach kids. The whole idea of popular music, popular TV shows having some classical music. The whole idea of video games having classical music. Music education, all of these things are just different ways to go. Community orchestra, bringing down the prices of tickets for the big orchestras. All of these things are helpful. No one by itself is going to do it all. But there is an optimistic point. Kids will eventually grow up to be 50-year-olds. And maybe at this point in their life, they're going to get tired of going to the rock concerts and they'll be looking for something different to do. Will it happen? Time will tell. I don't know. But that's always happened. But that seems to be what's happened in the past. As people mature, they look for new things, they get tired of the old, and they will hopefully grow into finding that, there's a whole richness of music out there waiting to be explored. And so many answers. Some of them will reach some kids, some of them will not, and hopefully we'll have a future where the classical music audience will continue to be there.
Okay, forgive me for reading again. The public schools, what can they do? Well, they don't have to change the curriculum at all. Public schools could play short, catchy classics, marches, dances, overtures. These are short and they will be loud, fast, sometimes not. But we can call them pops, essentially what Boston Pops once played, and still does, I guess. They could do this at recess times when people are not paying attention, but they'll absorb it. They could do it at lunch. Kids won't like it. Too bad. I don't think schools should give people what they want. Give the kids what they should have. That's one of the ideas that has killed education lately, over the last 50 years maybe. And that's that. What do the kids want? What do they? Well, of course, what do they want for lunch? That's reasonable. But what do they want in the curriculum? This happens in colleges too. You water down the stuff, and it's letting the tail wag the dog. The kids don't know what they need. They know what they want. They don't know what they need. Educators should take the lead. Know what people need, can use for the future, because they've lived into the future of being kids, but the kids haven't. So take back the school system. Anyway, these things at recess times, at the pops, they don't bother identifying them, because you could do what the old radio programs did. Just have them in the background. They'll sink in. And better not to identify them, see, you don't get so much resistance. Oh, that's classical? Forget it. Don't let them know it's classical. They might like it. Okay, that's my first point, what schools can do. Radio stations. The pop stuff is really good. What about commuter hours? People are stuck in cars, they're going through traffic. They might need something that will relax them or pep them up. Play fast stuff, slow stuff, but play pop, short works, so you can have several things done completely during somebody's commute. That, I think, will be a relief for them. Instead of playing what's now played, there seems to be no distinction with what is played at different hours, and there is an opportunity at commuter time to have some stuff sink in. Well, there are bound to be young commuters too, as well as the older people. So this would be a boon for everybody. I think even if you're not in the car, you might enjoy listening. Good God, think of the possibilities. All right. The selections of the pops are listener-friendly, will make an ordinarily arduous commute a little easier, I hope. They may even reduce accidents. Now, there's something. Okay, DMV, get on this. During the non-commuter hours, the quality of selections can be vastly improved, as the classics contain many waste-of-time works. Of course, this depends on who's doing the judging. We all have our particular favorites. So there isn't a great way to decide what should be played. I'm talking about the larger classics now, the ones that take a lot of time. They should be more interesting than they are now. I've got some suggestions. There are no general ways to describe these longer pieces that should be played in general at night, afternoon, morning. If we have a catalog, like there used to be a Schwann catalog, it identifies the works by composers, and it also lists how many recordings there are. More recordings is probably a more popular work. So get a judgment. I'm talking to the radio announcers now. You want to improve the quality of what you're selecting? Do this. Get some kind of catalog and find out what's popular that way. Okay, what about a book that you can get at a bookstore or online? I like books. Anyway, something like 50 Greatest Composers. You get a list of works by the 50 greatest composers. It's somebody's idea, but there are some pretty good selections in there. Or the 100 or 500 greatest compositions. The announcers should be aware of this, and they should realize that they're just selecting stuff for no good reason. They have a good reason, I'm sure, but there is a lot of stuff that's just waste of time, and I think I would offer to help. I listen to WMNR. That's the only way you can get around here. And they're the ones I'm talking to. If they would like to improve, contact me or take these suggestions. God, you guys are good and awful at the same time. Since you're the only station, don't quit.
Jack, can I interrupt
please.
for a minute? I happen to love WMNR.
Yeah.
The station manager is Kurt Anderson, who's the son of Leroy Anderson, who composed music that we older folks know very, very well. Sleigh Ride, Serenata, Blue Tango, the Typewriter Song,
These are the
Trumpers,
great
Lullaby.
pops. Yeah.
Right, pop music, all short pieces. Their broadcasters are, I believe, if not all, mostly volunteer, very, very well educated, and have been there for years and years and years, until somebody passes, and then a new one comes along and stays for a long, long time. And you're right, they do play on Saturdays. I think either Saturday or Sunday they have a 2-hour Broadway show, and they have jazz on Saturday from mid-afternoon until let's say mid-evening. But most of the time it's classical, and it's varied. They do old, new, and I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful station. It's one that I support.
Okay, good. I agree with you, but I do think they could take some of the works and replace them with better works. Like there's a guy named Telemann who is getting a lot of play. I don't think his music is generally worthwhile. There are some good works he must have done, and I think the good works, but you've got to make some judgment. Well, anyway, that's my thought.
Well, I just have one comment about that.
Yeah.
I think that one of the problems is that people, since music is used as a background for other activities, people like to put music on when they have guests come over, really softly in the background, or during dinner. And popular music is so simple in its structure that it's possible to have it seep into your ear while you're doing other things. So a lot of the classical music that is chosen by the classical music business enterprises, such as radio stations, they select music that can be talked over and that doesn't have to be paid attention to. And that's where some of the less interesting music happens to show up on the radio, because I know that radio station managers have told me they can't really program serious music except maybe between the hours of 8 and 10 in the evening, because people don't want to pay attention before that. They want to just have music to talk over. Hence, you move to the 18th century where there was a lot of music composed to be talked over. That Telemann, who you mentioned, and many of his contemporaries were not writing music for the ages. They were writing music for a performance that weekend, one time, and that will be the end of it. And that music is not that demanding. And so that music has become very popular for radio programmers.
Thank you for rescuing Telemann. Okay,
if I
listen to
rescued
me
him,
in
I'd
some
like to
time.
Telemann's pieces.
Okay, WMNR again, and other stations that might be interested. My opinions are not the ones you should listen to. If you want to email me, that's fine. I'll tell you what's great. But the idea of going to some books that will highlight what is more popular than other things. Sonata by Gemignani might be okay, but you should listen to it first and find out if it is. Anyway, the books. Go to the books, find out what's popular, and try putting more of those on instead of just using your own judgment. I know you have a lot of music in your collection, and it's not necessary to play it all, because that's not going to get a new audience. You're going to drive them away. Get things that are more popular. And I think I better quit now before I get some hate mail.
Jack, another thing too is with the younger generation, with their phones and tablets and whatever they use, if people belong to Amazon Prime, which is $99 for the year, you can download almost anything. You can find the piece you want. Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto by several different players.
The problem is, how do you know what you want till you've been exposed to it? So.
Well, I'm saying
Yeah.
there are people that are exposed that don't listen also,
Oh, all
don't
right.
listen often. So
Yeah, that's
it
a
is
good source,
what I'm saying
though.
is
Good
it's a
deal.
source if you belong to Amazon Prime. It's available, it's free, you can download it, you can download it to your phone. You can play it on an airplane if you download it correctly, which I haven't done yet. But, I thought I did, but I didn't. But it's a great source, and I've got a lot of music on my phone from Amazon Prime.
Okay.
I think that the internet is really the answer, because really the internet is the primary answer for everything today. You're not going to send people back to books in the era of the internet, but on the internet there are services like the one you just mentioned, Amazon Prime. There's also Pandora.
Right.
What's interesting about Pandora is that it's set up for, if you like X piece, try Y piece, so that they actually serve to broaden people's exposure. And I know for the novice, Pandora is very popular for that reason. I know a number of young people who have really gotten seriously into classical music by following the suggestions on Pandora.
If you set up a channel for the Beethoven channel, for instance, you're not going to hear only Beethoven. They play music similar to Beethoven.
Mhm.
So that's what you're talking about.
Right.
I'd like to express a somewhat different point of view, and it's what I've seen in my own library and another recent trend. I think a shared experience is very important. I believe that I am, in my library programs, taking people through entire concertos and pieces of music that they would never sit and listen to if they were at home listening on the radio. By the way, there's a new trend, and it's called home music, where people open up their doors and people come in and they listen to a chamber group, 2-3 pieces of music, maybe students from Juilliard, and they can be strangers, and just sit there in the home and again share their experience of listening to this music. And I think that to me that's maybe missing in the internet and some of the things you're talking about. I think that's an
Good
important
point.
part of it.
That's a good point.
Okay, I have one more area that might do a little changing. There's the public schools and there's the radio stations, now the orchestras themselves. If the orchestras would be willing to get some music appreciation free, get it done maybe on campus, wherever they are, or maybe through some library program, and libraries would be willing to do this, I'm sure. But represent something that might be upcoming on your concert schedule, but talk about information. Tell them what the composer was like, what was the time like, what were the contemporaries. Get information. One of the wonderful things about records in the old days is the back of the jacket had in large print some information about what was on the record. CDs in small print, they have information. But if you just listen to something on the radio, you rarely get information. So the orchestras, I think it would behoove them to try education, free education, in addition to the concerts. I think libraries would be willing to help if you want to reach out. And anyway, public schools, or radio stations, or orchestras, may the forza del destino be with you.
Thank you.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
to the audience who's bearing with us, in addition to learning that I'm highly opinionated, I hope you've gotten some good information from our wonderful panel. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.